The raw wind, a predator's breath, scoured my face, tasting of jet fuel and an impending storm. My eyes, wide and stinging, strained against the absolute dark that swallowed the horizon. Beneath my feet, the asphalt shivered. A deep, guttural thrum vibrated through the soles of my shoes, a mechanical heart beating too fast, too loud. It was the sound of an engine, alive and hungry, somewhere out there in the Inkai void. I could not see the plane, only feel the tremors it sent through the ground, a beast stirring in its lair. The air itself seemed to hum with a frantic energy, a silent countdown. There were no lights, not a single star piercing the velvet black above, only the relentless, unseen surge of power building to a crescendo. Then the abrupt, jarring snap of a keyboard key, the metallic tang of lukewarm coffee, the sterile glow of my monitor. I blinked, the sharp edges of my reality reasserting themselves. Another fragment, another echo from a place I hadn't yet truly visited, but felt hauntingly close. My world ordinarily was a symphony of precision. Numbers to me were not mere digits. They were stories, histories, confessions whispered in ledgers and balance sheets. I was Thomas, a forensic accountant, and my craft was the meticulous dissection of financial narratives, seeking the discordant note, the false cadence, the lie hidden in plain sight. My desk was an altar to order. Pencils aligned by lead hardness, sticky notes arrayed by color, a calculator poised like a silent sentinel. I thrived in the quiet hum of the server room, the rhythmic click of my mechanical keyboard, the crisp rustle of printouts. In this realm of absolute logic, chaos had no dominion. Today, my focus was the quarterly audit for the Sterling Conglomerate, a sprawling international entity and one of the firm's most lucrative clients. Their accounts typically flowed with the predictable rhythm of a well-oiled machine, vast sums moving with an almost elegant efficiency. My task was to ensure that elegance wasn't a mask for something less savory. I scrolled through transaction logs, lines of code stretching into an endless digital river. Each entry, a tiny bead on a colossal abacus, represented a movement of wealth, a decision made, a consequence unfolding. My eyes, trained over 2 decades, danced across the columns: date, amount, sender, receiver, purpose. A familiar ballet until it wasn't. The first tremor was subtle, a whisper in the data. A series of transfers, ostensibly for logistical support and consulting fees, caught my eye. They were large, not unusually so for Sterling, but their frequency felt off, a small itch, easily dismissed as an anomaly in the vast sea of legitimate transactions. I made a mental note, flagged the cluster, and continued my scan. My internal clock, calibrated to the rhythm of honest finance, felt a slight tremor. Then came the second, more pronounced jolt. A sudden surge in payments to a series of offshore holding companies, all registered in jurisdictions known for their opaque financial regulations. The amounts were rounded, perfectly so, which always pricked my suspicion. Real-world transactions rarely came in such neat packages, and the timing, many of these occurred late on Friday evenings or during international holidays when scrutiny might be lowest. My brow furrowed. I leaned closer to the screen, the blue light reflecting in my glasses. This wasn't just an anomaly, it was a pattern emerging, a faint constellation of red stars against the expected blackness. I cross-referenced the recipient entities. Global Logistics Solutions, Horizon Consulting Group, Veridian Holdings Limited. Names designed to sound legitimate, to blend into the corporate wallpaper. But a quick search through public databases revealed them to be shell corporations, lacking any substantial physical presence or verifiable operations. No websites, no listed employees beyond a single registered agent. Empty vessels, yet millions poured into them. My fingers flew across the keyboard, tracing the digital breadcrumbs. The sums involved began to coalesce into something truly staggering. Not just a few million here and there, but hundreds of millions funneled through this network of phantom companies over the past 18 months. And the trail led back, invariably, to Sterling Conglomerate. This wasn't a simple accounting error, a misplaced decimal. This was deliberate, intricate, and meticulously orchestrated. My mind raced, connecting the dots. The sheer volume, the calculated timing, the use of shell corporations, these were the hallmarks of something far more sinister than tax evasion. This bore the unmistakable signature of money laundering, a scheme of immense scale, designed to obscure the origins of illicit funds. But whose funds, and why Sterling? The implications rippled outwards, touching not just the firm, but the very foundations of trust I had built my career upon. Absolutely vital. Don't rock the boat unless I were absolutely certain. His smile had been genial, but his gaze had held an edge I hadn't fully appreciated then. Now, it felt like a veiled warning. A bead of sweat trickled down my temple. The numbers, my trusted companions, had betrayed me, revealing not order, but a profound, terrifying disorder. This was no glitch in the system. This was the system itself being exploited, corrupted. The quiet hum of the office now felt like the low thrum of that unseen engine, building to an unknown destination, pulling me along, whether I wished to go or not. This was not just a case. This was a chasm, and I was standing on its edge. Mechanica that seemed to tear at the very fabric of the night. My breath, a ragged plume in the frigid air, hitched in my throat. I stood frozen on the private airstrip, no lights, engine running, the vibrating hum growing into a deafening roar that swallowed all other sound. A shadow, monstrous and sleek, detached itself from the absolute blackness, a silhouette against the barely perceptible gray of the distant horizon. It was a private jet, its engines screaming their impatience, a beast awakened in the pre-dawn hush. No landing lights sliced through the gloom, no beacon guided its path. Only that guttural thrum, now a shuddering thunder in my chest, and the faint, acrid scent of jet fuel. I watched, a silent, unwilling witness, as the massive shape gathered speed. Dark arrow launched into the bruised sky. My hands, I noticed, were clenched so tightly my fingernails bit into my palms. What had I just seen? The questions clawed at the edges of my meticulous mind, demanding answers I knew, instinctively, I wasn't meant to find. The sterile hum of the office fluorescent lights felt like a dull throb behind my eyes after the raw, open vastness of the airstrip. My fingers, usually so precise, fumbled with the clasp of my briefcase. The meticulously organized binders, filled with columns of numbers that told a story of illicit wealth, felt heavier than usual. Each digit, each transaction, was a thread in a tapestry of deceit I had painstakingly unraveled over the past months. The sheer scale of it, the audacity, had initially left me breathless. I had tried, in my own quiet way, to dismiss the unease, to rationalize the inconsistencies. They spoke of layers of shell corporations, of offshore accounts funneling millions, then billions, into legitimate enterprises, scrubbing the grime of their origins clean. And the trail, once I dared to follow it past the initial misdirections, led back, disturbingly, to some of the firm's most lauded clients. And even more disturbingly, to internal financial structures I had no business scrutinizing. My plan was simple, direct, and entirely within protocol. I would present my findings, the irrefutable data, to the senior partner responsible for our division. The evidence, laid bare, would speak for itself. It had to. This wasn't some minor discrepancy. It was a systemic rot. I spent the morning meticulously arranging my presentation, double-checking every cross-reference, every footnote. The satisfaction I usually derived from such thoroughness was overshadowed by a churning anxiety. I rehearsed the key points in my head, anticipating questions, formulating precise, data-driven responses. I was Thomas, the forensic accountant dedicated to truth, no matter how uncomfortable. When the time came, I walked down the hushed corridor, the polished marble reflecting my grim resolve. The door to the senior partner's office stood ajar, a sliver of light escaping into the muted hall. I knocked, my knuckles feeling strangely numb against the solid wood. "Come in, Thomas," a calm voice invited. The senior partner sat behind a vast mahogany desk, his posture impeccable, a faint smile playing on his lips. He gestured to the plush visitor's chair opposite him. "To what do I owe the pleasure? Some intricate tax query, I presume." His tone was light, almost jovial, a stark contrast to the gravity I carried. I placed my briefcase on the floor, extracting the slim, unmarked binder. "It's about the Ongoing audit of the Sterling Group accounts, sir. I've uncovered some anomalies. I chose my words carefully, trying to maintain a professional detachment despite the tremor in my hands. He leaned back, his gaze steady, unblinking. Anomalies. That's a rather vague term for a man of my precision, Thomas. Indeed, I conceded. Let me be more precise. I believe I've identified a sophisticated money laundering operation spanning multiple jurisdictions, utilizing several of our firm's long-standing client entities as conduits. The scale is unprecedented. I pushed the binder across the desk. I've detailed the flow of funds, the shell corporations, the suspicious transactions, all corroborated by financial records and public data. He picked up the binder, his movements slow, deliberate. He didn't open it immediately. Instead, his eyes, sharp and intelligent, met mine. The Sterling Group, I say. They've been with us for decades, Thomas. Loyal clients, highly regarded. The data indicates otherwise, sir. The patterns are consistent with illicit financial activity. The capital injections from untraceable sources, the rapid cycling of funds through seemingly legitimate ventures, the unusual risk tolerance for such conservative investors. My voice gained strength as I recited the facts, the objective truth. He finally opened the binder, flipping through a few pages, his gaze sweeping over the meticulously presented charts and tables. He didn't linger on any specific detail. "I see I've been quite thorough," he murmured, his voice still unnervingly calm. "Impressive, as always." My gut tightened. "Thank you, sir. But this isn't about my thoroughness. It's about the integrity of the firm and the potential legal exposure." He closed the binder with a soft thud, placing it precisely in the center of his desk. His smile remained, but it no longer reached his eyes. Legal exposure, yes, a serious concern. However, Thomas, sometimes one can become overly zealous in their pursuit of data, overlook the broader context, perhaps. "The context here is a criminal enterprise, sir," I insisted, a slight edge creeping into my voice. "The numbers don't lie. This isn't a matter of interpretation." He steepled his fingers, his gaze unwavering. "The numbers, Thomas, are merely a reflection of the reality we choose to perceive. And sometimes, perceiving too much or perceiving things in a certain light can be counterproductive for everyone involved." He paused, letting the implication hang in the air. "The Sterling Group has been a significant contributor to our firm's success for many years, that we sweep it under the rug." His smile widened, a thin, almost predatory line. "I'm suggesting, Thomas, that you have done an excellent job identifying potential areas for optimization in our client portfolios, a very valuable contribution. Perhaps a new project, one less contentious, would be a better use of your considerable talents. We have a complex internal audit coming up for the new corporate acquisition. Your precision would be invaluable there." My mind reeled. He wasn't just dismissing my findings. He was actively redirecting me, subtly but firmly. The new project was a gilded cage, a way to sideline me, to ensure I looked no further. "But the Sterling Group investigation is concluded," he interrupted, his voice losing its pleasantry for a fleeting moment, revealing an undercurrent of steel. "For now. Your findings are noted, Thomas. We appreciate your diligence. But the firm's strategic interests, and indeed your own future here, are best served by focusing on your assigned tasks." "Understood." The air in the room suddenly felt heavy, thick with unspoken warnings. I understood perfectly. The corruption wasn't just with the clients. It reached higher, far higher, within the very walls of the firm I had dedicated my life to. I was not just investigating a crime. I was now standing in its path. And suddenly, the numbers on my spreadsheets felt less like evidence and more like targets painted on my back. Had I truly seen what I thought I saw, or was my zeal distorting reality? But then, the memory of the engine's roar, the absolute certainty of the data, pushed the doubt aside. No, I was right. And that made me very, very alone. The air, once thick with unspoken warnings, had solidified into a suffocating shroud. I understood, yes. The corruption wasn't merely a stain upon our clients. It had seeped, like venom through the veins of an old tree, into the very roots of the firm I had served with such devout meticulousness. My unwavering belief in the truth, my quiet dedication to the stark clarity of numbers, had led me not to justice, but to a precipice. Yet, the thought of retreating, of allowing the intricate web of deceit to remain, felt like a betrayal of my own spirit. A slow, cold fire ignited within me, replacing the chill of fear with the resolve of a man cornered. My office, a sanctuary of ordered chaos by day, became a clandestine war room by night. The firm's network, once my domain, was now a minefield. I moved with the phantom touch of a ghost, accessing archived files, cross-referencing ledger entries, and sifting through years of quarterly reports that had once seemed innocuous. Each keystroke was a whispered prayer, each downloaded document a stolen breath. I copied everything, not to the firm's secure servers, but to a discreet external drive, a digital anchor against the rising tide of complicity. The initial threads were faint, almost imperceptible. A series of seemingly unrelated asset transfers, small enough to bypass immediate scrutiny, yet too frequent to be coincidental. They flowed from a shell corporation in the Cayman Islands through a seemingly legitimate real estate development firm in Dubai, and finally dispersed into a network of holding companies across Eastern Europe. I was comparing a series of acquisition reports for a defunct timber company with the financials of a burgeoning tech startup. The timber company, according to its publicly filed statements, had been liquidated years ago, its assets sold off. Yet here, buried in the footnotes of a foreign investment portfolio, were references to its ongoing, albeit minimal, operational expenses. A ghost company, bleeding money in small, steady increments. But to what end? Why keep a husk alive? The answer, when it began to coalesce, was both simple and terrifying. These were not just laundered funds. They were ghost investments, phantom assets, designed to create a false sense of legitimate activity for other, far larger sums. The timber company, I realized, was a tiny, intricate cog in a much grander machine. It existed solely to generate believable, if modest, losses that could be offset against fabricated gains elsewhere, creating a labyrinthine path for truly illicit money to pass through undetected. My fingers flew across the keyboard, a relentless dance of discovery. I found a pattern. Every 3 months, like clockwork, a specific set of wire transfers would originate from a bank in Liechtenstein, pass through 3 intermediary banks in quick succession, and finally land in the accounts of these ghost companies. The amounts varied, always just under the threshold that would trigger automatic flags. It was elegant, insidious. A new name surfaced in my digging, not a person, but a vessel, the Sea Serpent. It was listed as the primary asset of one of the shell corporations, a cargo ship. But its manifest records were suspiciously sparse, its port calls inconsistent with its stated purpose of transporting agricultural goods. I cross-referenced its registration with global shipping databases. The Sea Serpent existed, yes, but its official capacity and its actual movements seemed to diverge wildly. My gut tightened. This was not just about numbers anymore. This was about physical assets, about the movement of things, not just money. I remembered a casual conversation with an administrative assistant weeks prior, an offhand comment about a client trip that had been unusually secretive, requiring a last-minute charter flight to an undisclosed location. The assistant had mentioned the charter company by name. Now, following a hunch, I looked into the charter company's flight logs. There, among the legitimate business trips, was a recurring destination, a remote island nation known for its lax financial regulations, and a singular private airstrip. No lights, just a strip of asphalt carved into the jungle. The ghost companies, the Sea Serpent, the charter flights, the obscure island. Could I truly untangle this without being swallowed whole? Yet, the quiet fire within me still burned. I had to see. I had to confirm. Using a burner phone I'd bought with cash, I called a contact, a former colleague from a past life who now worked as a freelance investigator. I spoke in veiled terms, a hypothetical scenario about tracking a specific type of asset. The investigator, a practical man of few words, understood the unspoken urgency. He gave me the coordinates, a set of numbers that pulsed on my screen like a malignant heartbeat. Weeks later, under the cloak of a moonless night, I found myself miles from the familiar glow of the city, hidden in the dense undergrowth bordering a perimeter fence. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and distant jet fuel. Before me lay the very place I had unearthed in the digital realm, a private airstrip, no lights, engine running. My breath hitched. A sleek, twin-engine jet, black as the night sky, idled at the far end of the tarmac, its engines a low, guttural growl that vibrated through the ground. No landing lights, no ground crew, just the aircraft, a silent predator waiting. Then a vehicle, an unmarked black SUV, approached the jet. They were transferring something from the SUV into the jet's cargo hold, large, heavy crates. My heart hammered, a frantic drum against my ribs. This wasn't just money. The sea serpent might be a red herring, or perhaps another piece of the puzzle, but this private airstrip, no lights, engine running, was the undeniable visceral proof that I wasn't chasing phantoms. I was chasing something real, something dangerous, and it was moving right before my eyes. I had seen enough. I understood, yes. My world, once a meticulous ledger of debits and credits, had become a shifting landscape of shadows and whispers. A quiet fury, cold and sharp, began to etch itself into my resolve, hardening the edges of my cautious nature. I would not simply retreat. The first subtle shift was the car. I noticed it first on Tuesday evening, its engine idling softly, a wisp of exhaust curling into the cool air. I dismissed it then, a fleeting observation. But by Wednesday morning, as I left for the office, it was there again, a different occupant perhaps, but the same silent vigil. A prickle of unease, like fine grit under the skin, began. My work, which once offered the sanctuary of pure logic, now felt like a high-wire act. Each spreadsheet, each transaction I scrutinized, felt charged with a dangerous current. I had begun to use a burner laptop, hidden deep within my bag, for my real investigation. Its screen, a pale glow in the late hours of my study, held the true, ugly figures I dared not touch on the firm's network. I was mapping connections, tracing the flow of illicit funds through shell corporations and offshore accounts, a spiderweb spun with exquisite, criminal precision. It was a dizzying, intricate dance, and I was beginning to see the patterns, the hidden rhythms of their greed. The wait that doesn't add up moment arrived with a jolt, a sudden crack in the carefully constructed facade. I was cross-referencing a series of disbursements from a subsidiary of a client, funds supposedly allocated for logistical support in a remote region. The numbers themselves were plausible, but the frequency and consistency of these payments, always just below the threshold that would trigger closer scrutiny, struck me as too perfect. And then, a single, minuscule discrepancy, a timestamp on one transfer that preceded the official approval date by 7 hours. Who was processing these without proper authorization, and why was the system not flagging it? My fingers hovered over the keyboard, a shiver running down my spine. Someone was actively protecting this flow. The psychological pressure began to mount, subtle yet insistent. My office, usually a sanctuary of ordered chaos, felt watched. A pen I'd left horizontally on my desk was vertical. A stack of files, usually angled precisely, was shifted by a fraction of an inch. Tiny, almost imperceptible changes that, to my meticulous eye, screamed of intrusion. I began to set traps, small private markers that only I would notice. Then came the phone call. My burner phone, its existence known only to me, buzzed with an unknown number. I hesitated, then answered. A low voice, devoid of inflection, spoke a single sentence. Some ledgers are best left unread, Thomas. The line clicked dead. It was a ghost in the machine, a disembodied warning that tightened the knot in my stomach. They knew my name. They knew about my other phone. The following evening, as I walked home, a stranger brushed past me on the sidewalk. His hand, as it passed my jacket pocket, lingered for a fraction of a second too long. When I reached my apartment, my pocket felt lighter. My burner phone was gone. They weren't just watching. They were actively engaging, testing the boundaries of my resolve. Doubt, a creeping, insidious fog, began to cloud my mind. Was I truly capable of navigating this treacherous labyrinth? My family, the thought of them vulnerable, unprotected, was a sharp blade twisting in my gut. Had I, in my pursuit of truth, inadvertently endangered everything I held dear? Yet the anger persisted, a stubborn ember beneath the ash of fear. That singular timestamp, The phantom transfer gnawed at me. It led to a series of shell companies, all registered to a dilapidated mailbox service, with one recurring name listed as a director. A man I recognized from a grainy photograph in an old firm database, a minor partner who had vanished years ago, officially retired due to health reasons. His name reappeared on a manifest, a flight log, for a private jet operation tied to one of the client's logistical entities. The destination was a remote, obscure location. I needed to see it to understand. Under the cloak of a moonless night, I drove. The road, rough and unpaved, eventually ended at a chain-link fence, partially obscured by overgrown brush. Beyond it, a vast, flat expanse of asphalt stretched into the gloom. This was it, a private airstrip, no lights, engine running. The low thrum of the aircraft's engine was a visceral sound, vibrating through the ground and up into my bones. It was a deep, guttural growl that suggested power, readiness, and an imminent departure. The air was thick with the scent of jet fuel and damp earth. The engine's roar intensified, a prelude to flight. Figures moved in the periphery, indistinct shapes against the backdrop of the night. For a fleeting moment, it illuminated a man, his face grim, his posture rigid, directing others. It was the director from the client company, the one whose office door had been so swiftly closed to me, the one who had offered the veiled threats. He was here, overseeing this clandestine operation, this departure into the night. My stomach twisted. A sudden, sharp movement caught my eye. A heavy crate, marked with the same cryptic symbol I had seen on a ledger entry, was being hoisted into the jet's cargo hold. My breath hitched. The numbers, the discrepancies, the warnings, the surveillance, it all converged on this solitary, desolate airstrip. This was their escape route, their artery for moving. Whatever they moved, my pulse hammered. I had to get closer to see more, to understand what was being loaded. Just as I thought I might gain a clearer view, a guttural voice barked an order, too far away to discern the words, but close enough to send a jolt of ice through me. My heart leaped into my throat. I froze, a hunted animal caught in the sudden glare. I could feel the heat of its intensity, the accusation in its unwavering stare. I pressed myself against the corrugated metal, willing myself to become invisible, my breathing shallow, ragged. Had they seen me? Was this the end of my desperate, foolish quest? The engine's roar swelled, a hungry beast preparing to devour the night. I understood, yes. My world, built on ledger lines and irrefutable figures, had crumbled into a chaotic mosaic of shadows and hushed threats. I walked through the door of my own home, the familiar scent of cinnamon and lavender a stark contrast to the acrid tang of deceit clinging to my clothes. My wife, humming a tuneless melody, was arranging a vase of sunflowers on the kitchen island, their cheerful yellow a cruel mockery of the storm brewing within me. My daughter, a whirlwind of bright laughter, chased the cat through the living room, her small feet thudding a rhythm of innocence that I desperately wanted to preserve. I watched them, a silent sentinel, my chest tightening with a premonition of fragility. Every light in the house felt too bright, every sound too loud, magnifying the chasm between their peaceful ignorance and my burgeoning dread. Later that afternoon, the phone call came. I just picked up Lily from her art class at the community center. There was a man. He knew her name. He said he was a friend of her father's, coming to check on her. He had a small, carved wooden bird, just like the one I keep on my desk. My breath hitched, a shard of ice in my throat. The carved bird, a gift from a long-retired partner, whimsical piece of desk decor I'd barely noticed in years, yet it sat prominently on my mahogany. It was a detail only someone who had been inside my office, observing me, would know. What happened? I managed, my voice a strained rasp. He tried to give it to her, she continued, a tremor running through her words. Said it was a secret message from I told him no, that I'd take it. He just smiled. And then he walked away into the park across the street. When I looked again, he was gone, just gone. His voice broke then, a small, choked sob. Thomas, who was that? He looked at me like he knew everything. My grip on the phone tightened until my knuckles blanched. The cinnamon and lavender of home vanished, replaced by the metallic tang of fear. A secret message. A carved bird. They hadn't just threatened my career, my life. They had touched the fragile periphery of my daughter's world. The implication was a hammer blow to my gut. This wasn't a random incident, a mistaken identity. This was precise. This was a message. I drove, a man possessed, the city streets blurring into an indistinguishable gray ribbon. It wasn't just surveillance. It was a brazen, intimate violation. They were telling me they could reach her anytime, anywhere. My hands, usually steady and precise, trembled on the steering wheel. I had been so meticulous in my clandestine work, so careful to compartmentalize. Had I truly been so naive, so arrogant to believe my careful threads of investigation could remain unseen? Perhaps I was out of my depth, a mere accountant against an unseen leviathan. But the doubt was fleeting, quickly incinerated by a white-hot rage. This wasn't about numbers anymore. This wasn't about exposing corporate malfeasance. This was about a small, innocent girl who had almost been lured by a silent predator. They had crossed a line, one etched in the very bedrock of my being. They were threatening my very existence, piece by precious piece. My careful, quiet investigation, born of a need for truth and justice, had now morphed into a primal fight for survival. My thoughts, a whirlwind of desperate strategies, coalesced into a single, dangerous impulse. I needed to see. I needed to understand the scale of the hydra I had awakened. I bypassed my usual route home, the tires humming a low, urgent song on the asphalt. The car finally crunched onto a gravel track, leading me to a desolate stretch of land. The air here was sharp with the scent of jet fuel and damp earth. It was a private airstrip, no lights, engine running. My headlights cut through the inky blackness, revealing only the faint outline of a sleek, twin-engine jet, its silhouette a hungry bird poised for flight or descent. The jet's engine continued its muted roar, a constant, unsettling pulse. This wasn't just about laundered funds and illicit accounts. This was about global reach, about silent departures and arrivals under the cloak of night. They wanted a fight, and for my family, I would give them one. The cinnamon and lavender, once a comforting shroud, now felt like a fragile veil easily torn. My knuckles, white against the cool plastic of the phone, spoke of a fear more visceral than any spreadsheet could quantify. A carved bird, a secret message. They hadn't merely threatened the numbers I meticulously balanced, nor the career I had painstakingly built. They had reached into the tender periphery of my daughter's world, a world I had sworn to keep pristine. The implication was a serpent coiling in my gut, venom spreading through every vein. Sleep became a distant shore. My thoughts, restless tides, crashed against the unyielding wall of my predicament. The firm, a gilded cage, offered no sanctuary. Its polished corridors, once symbols of ambition, now felt like a labyrinth designed to disorient and entrap. The internal channels I had once trusted were choked with complicity or fear. My initial attempts to raise an alarm had been met with the chilling politeness of dismissal, a quiet, almost imperceptible closing of doors. The veiled threats, subtle as a whisper on a winter wind, had sharpened into something more direct, more personal. I was alone, adrift in a sea of corruption, and the currents were pulling me under. But the image of that small, carved bird, a clumsy, innocent offering, ignited a different kind of fire. I couldn't fight this beast cloaked in corporate legitimacy with my bare hands or with the sterile tools of forensic accounting alone. My mind, usually a precise instrument for figures and audits, now sifted through faces, through names whispered in hushed tones over expensive whiskey. There was the detective, a stoic figure I'd encountered once during a minor embezzlement case, whose eyes held a weary knowing. Too official, I reasoned, too easily absorbed by the system I now distrusted. Then, the investigative journalist, a name synonymous with expose and scandal, whose articles often sliced through the carefully constructed facades of power. No, I needed someone who understood the architecture of their deceit, someone who had walked these very halls, breathed this same rarefied, tainted air. My thoughts snagged on the former colleague, Marcus Thorne. No, not Marcus, just the former colleague, a man whose brilliance had once shone brighter than any other in our department, only to be extinguished by a scandal that felt too convenient, too perfectly timed, even then. He had been accused of insider trading, a swift, brutal excommunication from the hallowed halls of finance. I had always harbored a flicker of doubt about his guilt, a tiny ember beneath the ashes of public condemnation. Now, that ember glowed with a desperate hope. He knew the players, the game, the hidden rules. He had seen the underbelly, perhaps even felt its fangs. He was outside the system, yet intimately familiar with its gears. Reaching him proved a delicate dance. I couldn't risk a digital trace, not with the sophistication of their reach. My old, forgotten burner phone, tucked away in a dusty drawer since a brief, ill-advised foray into a cryptocurrency venture, became my lifeline. A series of untraceable calls, each to a different anonymous contact I dug up from the fringes of my past, slowly led me to a single, cryptic instruction. A time, a place. A phrase only the former colleague would recognize. A snippet from an obscure financial theory we'd once debated late into the night. The tension in my chest tightened with each passing hour, a drumbeat against my ribs. The air grew heavy, thick with the scent of damp earth and something metallic. Then, through the gloom, I saw it, a private airstrip, no lights, engine running. The low thrum vibrated through the ground, a restless beast anticipating flight. My heart hammered against my sternum, a frantic captive. This was it. There was no turning back. The only sound now was the plane's engine, a constant, menacing hum. My breath hitched. There was this an ambush, a trap sprung by the very people I sought to expose. Had I misjudged the former colleague? Was he truly disgraced, or merely playing a longer game? A figure detached itself from the shadow of the plane's wing, moving with a familiar, lanky gait. The former colleague. His silhouette was leaner than I remembered, etched with the harsh lines of a life lived on the periphery. He approached my car slowly, his hands visible, an unspoken signal of non-aggression. His lips, a thin line, barely moved. A beautiful theory, Thomas. Shame it doesn't account for human greed. His voice was hoarse, gravelly, a stark contrast to the articulate cadence I remembered. Which is it? I don't know, I admitted, the raw honesty a relief. I have something that implicates them, all of them. I pulled the encrypted drive from my pocket, its weight a heavy promise. The anomalies I found. They're just the tip. It's a network. His gaze flickered to the running engine of the plane. I read talking about the Hydra, he said, his voice flat, devoid of surprise. The beast with many heads. My breath caught. The Hydra. I repeated, the name echoing with an ancient, monstrous power. I know about this. This was the reveal. The sudden widening of the chasm I thought I understood. A dry, mirthless chuckle escaped him. I didn't just know about it, Thomas. I was swallowed by it. My insider trading charges, a convenient fiction. I got too close to one of their conduits, saw too much. They didn't want to kill me, not directly, too messy. They preferred to bury me alive, professionally. Every last detail. He knew. He knew about the bird, the symbol of their reach, their malice. How could he? My internal alarm bells screamed, but a deeper part of me, the part that recognized the shared pain in his gaze, urged me to trust. This wasn't a trap. This was a man who understood the true cost of digging too deep. The weight of it, once crushing, now felt distributed, however precariously, between unlikely allies. A man. The word barely formed on my tongue, a fragile bridge between suspicion and a desperate, burgeoning hope. His eyes, twin pools of a weary understanding, held mine, a silent language spoken across the chasm of our shared predicament. He reached, slowly, deliberately, towards an inner pocket of his worn jacket, his gaze never wavering, a flicker of something, urgency, warning, dancing within their depths. "They know you're close," he murmured, his voice a low rasp, barely audible above the distant thrum of the city. "Closer than you imagine." A chill, sharper than any night wind, traced its path down my spine. The air itself seemed to thicken, pressing in on me, each molecule heavy with unspoken threats. My senses, honed by weeks of paranoia, screamed a silent warning. It wasn't the contact I feared, not truly, but the unseen eyes that had, perhaps, followed him or me. A sudden, guttural roar shattered the fragile peace. A black sedan, its headlights extinguished, careening around the corner of the abandoned warehouse, tires spitting gravel. "Run, Thomas!" The contact bellowed, his voice cracking as he shoved a small, metallic object into my palm. It felt cold, smooth, alien. He fell without a sound, a silent testament to the swift, brutal efficiency of their reach. My breath hitched, a strangled gasp trapped in my throat. The metallic object, warm now from my grip, pressed into my flesh. No time for thought, no space for grief. Instinct, raw and primal, seized me. I bolted, my legs pumping, a frantic rhythm against the unforgiving pavement. The car, a predatory beast, surged forward, its engine a hungry growl. I could hear the heavy thud of boots behind me, the ragged breaths of pursuers. They were fast, faster than I'd anticipated. I veered sharply, scrambling over a low concrete barrier, my hands scraping against the rough surface. The metallic taste of fear was acrid on my tongue. My lungs burned, each gasp for air a searing pain. I could feel the vibrations of their approach, a tremor in the very ground beneath my feet. A hand, rough and strong, snatched at my shoulder, tearing a strip of fabric from my jacket. I twisted, throwing an elbow blindly, hearing a grunt of pain, a small victory in a losing battle. The ground shifted beneath my sneakers, transitioning from asphalt to packed earth, then to something harder, flatter. My eyes, straining, began to discern the faint outlines of a vast, open space. A low, persistent hum, a deep vibration that resonated in my chest, grew louder, more insistent. It was the sound of powerful machinery, a promise of escape or a harbinger of doom. Then I saw it, an impassable silhouette against the ink-black sky, a private jet, its engines a quiet, menacing purr. I was on a private airstrip, no lights, engine running. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. This wasn't just a chase, it was an abduction. They had planned this meticulously. The contact's desperate warning, the object in my hand, it was all part of a larger, terrifying design. Two figures, large and unyielding, stood at the base of the ramp, their forms indistinct in the gloom, waiting. They expected me. "Get him!" a voice barked close behind me. Panic threatened to overwhelm me, but a sliver of stubborn defiance, born of weeks spent unraveling their insidious web, flared within. I wouldn't be taken, not like this. I glanced at the object in my hand. It was a small, flat data chip, no bigger than my thumbnail, with a tiny, stylized bird etched into its surface, the same symbol I'd seen in their ledgers, on their encrypted files. Undeniable. This was it, the evidence. I feigned a stumble, buying myself a precious second. My eyes darted around, searching for an exit, any exit. The airstrip stretched endlessly, a flat, exposed canvas under the indifferent stars. But to my right, I saw the faint outline of a service vehicle, a ground support cart, its tires deflated, abandoned, desperate gamble. With a surge of adrenaline, I changed direction, veering sharply towards the broken-down cart. The pursuers, momentarily thrown off, shouted, "Small mercies." I reached the cart, my fingers scrabbling for purchase, and scrambled over its rusted frame, dropping low on the other side. The engine's roar intensified, the jet preparing for takeoff. The ground vibrated with its power. I could hear the shouts, closer now, their anger palpable. They knew I had something. They wanted it back. I pressed myself against the cold metal of the cart, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The data chip was a burning ember in my clenched fist. I coiled, my muscles screaming. A heavy hand reached over, grabbing blindly. I lashed out, connecting with something soft, then hard. A grunt. A sharp pain lanced through my side as I landed, a rock digging into my ribs. But I was free for now. I lay there, gasping, the taste of blood in my mouth, the data chip still clutched tight in my hand. My body ached, a symphony of bruises and scraped skin, but my mind was clear, sharper than it had ever been. They were real. Their reach was terrifying. The contact was gone. But I had something undeniable. There was no turning back, no going home. The hunt had begun, and I was the prey, but I held a weapon now, a tiny spark of truth that could ignite a firestorm. I had to disappear. Completely. It wasn't the contact I feared, not truly, but the unseen eyes that had already begun to weave the invisible threads of my undoing. A cold certainty, like the grip of a winter frost, settled deep within me. They knew, and knowing they would move. The summons arrived with an unsettling urgency, a terse message from the senior partner's assistant demanding my immediate presence. No niceties, no pretense of routine. My gut, a churning cauldron of apprehension, tightened further, polished halls of the firm, usually a sanctuary of order and quiet ambition. now felt like a gilded cage, each hushed murmur a potential judgment. The senior partner's office, a mausoleum of dark wood and hushed power, was colder than I remembered. He sat behind his vast mahogany desk, his face a mask of grim disappointment, while beside him, the firm's security chief, a man whose gaze was as sharp and unyielding as a razor's edge, stood with his arms crossed. There was no preamble, no gentle easing into the conversation. The air crackled with accusation. "Thomas," the senior partner began, his voice devoid of its usual warmth, "we have uncovered a deeply disturbing situation." The security chief stepped forward, a tablet clutched in his hand. He projected its screen onto the wall, illuminating a series of emails, spreadsheets, and encrypted files. My name, emblazoned across the top of each document, felt like a brand. Proprietary client information, sensitive financial strategies, even internal audit protocols, all seemingly transmitted from my secure terminal to a shell company registered in a distant, anonymous jurisdiction. The dates and times were meticulously logged, each entry a nail in my coffin. "These," the security chief stated, his voice flat, "are communications from your system, Thomas, to a known competitor. The damage to our firm's reputation and financial standing is incalculable." My breath hitched. The images on the screen swam before my eyes, a grotesque parody of my own meticulous work. The words, though formatted like my reports, contained phrases, turns of syntax that were subtly alien. "My system is secure. I would never." The senior partner raised a hand, cutting me off. "The evidence, Thomas, is irrefutable. My digital fingerprints are all over this. The drive. I knew nothing of any such drive. My desk was always meticulously organized, a testament to my dedication. Yet there it was, a photograph of a gleaming silver rectangle nestled amongst my pens. It looked like something I might own, generic enough to be plausible, yet utterly foreign to my memory. The time stamps on these transfers, I insisted, my voice gaining a desperate edge. They coincide with periods I was out of the office, or even at home with my family. My access logs would prove it. The security chief's lips thinned. "Your remote access logs show you were active, Thomas, very active. And the drive, it was wiped clean except for these files, then meticulously placed. It all points to a calculated betrayal." Betrayal. The word hung in the air, thick and suffocating. My world, built on trust and integrity, splintered. They had orchestrated this with a terrifying proficiency, weaving a narrative so convincing, so damning, that even I, in a moment of crushing self-doubt, felt a flicker of uncertainty. Had I, in some sleep-deprived haze, committed an error, left a backdoor open, allowed some insidious digital phantom to wear my skin? No. The thought was fleeting, quickly banished by the sheer impossibility of it. I knew my own work. This was not me. This was a brutal, orchestrated lie. "We have no choice, Thomas," the senior partner concluded, gaze fixed somewhere beyond me, "but to terminate your employment, effective immediately. All access to firm resources has been revoked. Security will escort you from the premises." The world tilted. The words, though anticipated, struck with the force of a physical blow. Fired, disgraced, framed. The carefully constructed edifice of my life crumbled into dust. My family. How would I tell them? The firm's security personnel, two hulking figures I had never noticed before, materialized silently, their presence a stark barrier between me and everything I had known. My office, now stripped of its personal touches, felt alien. My few belongings were packed into a box, a pathetic collection of memories. My access card, my key to this life, was confiscated with a snap. The cold metal of the elevator doors closing felt like the ceiling of a tomb. Outside, the city's indifferent hum was a cruel counterpoint to the tempest raging within me. My phone, once a lifeline, now felt like a lead weight. Calls to colleagues went unanswered or were met with curt, dismissive tones. My name, Thomas, once a mark of respect, now carried the stench of suspicion. Days blurred into a haze of disbelief and despair. My wife, her face a canvas of worry and confusion, tried to understand, but the official story, propagated with malicious efficiency, painted me as a greedy traitor. I couldn't risk telling her the full, horrifying truth, not yet. Not when the unseen eyes still watched, their reach seemingly limitless. I kept her and my children at a distance, a self-imposed exile to shield them from the storm that had consumed me. Sleep offered no solace, only a relentless replay of the fabricated evidence. But one detail, a stubborn shard of truth, kept gnawing at the edges of my despair. A specific font, used in the heading of one of the incriminating spreadsheets, was an obscure custom type the firm had abandoned years ago. I remembered a heated debate about it. No one, certainly not I, would have used it for a new document. It was a subtle anachronism, a single misplaced thread in their elaborate tapestry of lies. Then came the anonymous message, a single, untraceable text. Your answers await where the sky meets the earth under the cloak of night. Alone. Desperation, a bitter fuel, propelled me. The asphalt ribbon unraveled into a desolate stretch of road, winding through scrubland and skeletal trees. Finally, the road opened onto a vast, empty expanse. A private airstrip, no lights, engine running. Its silhouette was barely discernible against the starless sky, a silent bird of prey poised for flight. This was a declaration. The engine's roar intensified, a promise of swift departure, or perhaps a warning. My isolation was complete, my ruin absolute, but the anachronistic font, that single, nagging detail, had become a tiny ember in my gut, heart and defiant. They had framed me, broken me, but they had not yet, extinguished the truth. The air grew colder, thinner, biding at the edges of my resolve. Finally, the road itself surrendered to a gravel track, a dusty scar across the barren earth, leading me to a place shrouded in the deepest hour before dawn. My rental car, a muted shadow, found purchase behind a cluster of gnarled junipers, their branches clawing at the ink-black sky. Ahead, barely discernible against the horizon's faint gray bleed, was a private airstrip, no lights, engine running. The sound, a low, guttural thrum, vibrated through the ground, a predatory purr in the stillness. I moved with the cautious grace of a hunter, my senses sharpened by desperation. The air, a blade against my cheek, carried the acrid scent of jet fuel and damp earth. Through the skeletal branches, a silhouette began to coalesce. A sleek, twin-engine jet, its form both elegant and sinister. Figures moved around the plain, indistinct shapes in the pre-dawn gloom. I saw briefcases, yes, passed with practiced efficiency between a man in a tailored coat and another, bulkier individual. But then something else. Crates. Not the usual luggage, not the standard cargo. These were stenciled, almost crudely, with a series of alphanumeric codes. My eyes, trained to find patterns in the chaos of data, snagged on one particular sequence, LV37CFX. It meant nothing to me, yet it felt significant, a misplaced puzzle piece. The man in the tailored coat, a face I recognized from hushed conversations in executive suites, gestured impatiently. The bulkier individual, clearly a subordinate, hustled a final crate towards the plane. The movement was rushed, frantic, almost careless. It was the carelessness that caught me. For an operation so meticulous, so well-oiled in its deception, this haste felt uncharacteristic. Why the rush at a private airstrip, devoid of prying eyes? The engine was already running, the crew likely aboard. What was the imperative for such hurried loading? This wasn't just about moving money. The briefcases, the cash, that was the obvious layer. But the crates with their cryptic markings suggested something more. My mind, a ledger in perpetual motion, began to cross-reference. I thought of the shell companies, the false invoices, the inflated procurement costs I had painstakingly uncovered. They were designed to justify vast sums of money, to make illicit wealth appear legitimate. But these crates, they weren't cash, they were physical assets. Why here? Why now? I retreated deeper into the junipers, the rough bark scraping against my jacket. The images played on the screen of my mind. The hurried exchange, the specific code, the almost palpable anxiety of the men. And then it clicked, a lark turning with a soft, decisive sound. The vulnerability. My initial investigation had focused on the flow of money, the digital trails, the paper labyrinth. I'd seen the money leave the firm, vanish into offshore accounts, and resurface, laundered. But I had always assumed the physical counterpart, the actual cash, being moved separately, through established, albeit illegal, channels. This airstrip, this clandestine exchange, told a different story. They weren't just moving money, they were moving value. The crates, I realized with a jolt that cleared the fog of fear, were filled with something far more concentrated, far more easily transported and concealed than stacks of cash. Something that commanded an even higher premium, something that could be instantly converted into untraceable funds, precious commodities, art perhaps, or even industrial-grade diamonds, untraceable minerals. The codes weren't for inventory, they were for valuation. This wasn't just money laundering. This was asset stripping on a grand scale, leveraging their legitimate businesses to smuggle high-value goods out of the country, then using the proceeds to fuel their criminal enterprises. The financial records I had meticulously built documented the payments for these supposed goods, the fictional invoices, the ghost shipments. But the actual goods themselves were being moved outside the official ledger, generating a second, untraceable stream of wealth that dwarfed even the laundered cash. The LV37 CFX code, insignificant moments ago, now screamed a silent truth. It was a specific identifier, likely for a particular type of asset, a commodity that could be logged as a legitimate purchase in one country and sold for pure, untraceable profit in another. My breath hitched. This was the crucial vulnerability. The firm's financial statements, doctored as they were, still had to account for some form of expenditure to justify the outgoing funds. They were buying ghost assets, then using their own logistics to move real, high-value assets that generated pure, untaxed, untraceable profit. The firm wasn't just a conduit for dirty money. It was a front for a vast, illegal trade network, a tremor of a new kind, not fear, but a surge of grim determination coursed through me. Stripped of my career, my home, my family's safety hanging by a thread, I was left with only my mind. I couldn't intercept the plane. I couldn't physically stop them, but I could expose their hidden economy. I could trace the real assets, the ones they thought were invisible, through the very financial system they had corrupted. I had access to the firm's legacy systems, a backdoor I had built years ago for emergency audits, a ghost key in the digital lock. I knew the specific anomalies in their procurement records, the ones that hinted at these phantom purchases. My countermove would not be a brute force attack, but a precise, surgical strike. I would connect the LV37 CFX code, or whatever it represented, to the specific shell companies that purportedly bought it. Then, I would correlate the timing of these phantom purchases with the flight logs of this private airstrip, records that would eventually, however discreetly, exist somewhere in the digital ether. It was a monstrous undertaking, a digital forensics operation on the scale of an international criminal network. I was an accountant, not a field agent. I was a man who dealt in numbers, not danger. Could I, Thomas, truly unravel this? Could I expose a web so vast, so ruthless, with only my intellect as a weapon? The jet's engines roared, a sudden, deafening crescendo that made the ground tremble. It climbed swiftly, silently, until it was just a fading hum, then nothing but the vast, empty canvas of the coming day. They thought they were invisible. They thought their system was impenetrable. But they had made a mistake, a small, careless mistake in the pre-dawn scramble. And I, Thomas, the meticulous number cruncher, had seen it. I had my weapon, and I knew exactly where to strike. The game had changed. The junipers released me, their scent clinging to my jacket like a secret. The chill wind, a sharp blade, carved clarity into my mind. The vulnerability, not a flaw in their armor, but a deliberate chink I could exploit, a calculated risk woven into the very fabric of their greed. My initial fear, a suffocating blanket, had now frayed at the edges, revealing a steely thread of resolve beneath. I had seen the hurried exchange, the specific code, the almost palpable anxiety of the men. They valued control above all else, and control, once challenged, becomes a weakness. I moved with a precision born of desperation, each step measured, each breath a silent prayer for fortitude. The city slept in a patchwork of muted lights, indifferent to the precipice upon which I now stood. My destination was a forgotten corner of an industrial park, a shell of a building where dust motes danced in the slivers of moonlight-piercing grimy windows. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of decay and forgotten ambition, a fitting stage for my desperate act. I had prepared this space weeks ago, a ghost in the machine, anticipating a moment like this. A single, battered desk, a monitor humming faintly, and a network connection routed through a labyrinth of proxies. My fingers, usually so steady with the ledger, trembled once as they hovered over the keyboard. This was not about numbers anymore. It was about lives. My own, yes, but more terrifyingly, theirs. My family, distant and unaware, yet tethered to my every move by an invisible, unbreakable thread. I pushed the fear down, a stone sinking in cold water, and began to work. The screen glowed, a pale blue eye reflecting my grim resolve. I wove a digital phantom, a shimmering tapestry of false transactions and phantom accounts. This was the bait, meticulously crafted to mimic the syndicate's own intricate methods, yet subtly flawed, designed to draw their attention, to lead their hounds down a false trail. Every decimal point, every coded transfer, was a whisper of misdirection, a siren song for their predatory instincts. I watched the lines of code unfurl, a complex spell cast into the ether, knowing that with each keystroke, I was narrowing the window between discovery and destruction. Simultaneously, with the other hand, almost instinctively, I packaged the truth. The real data, distilled to its raw, undeniable essence, compressed and encrypted, a digital time capsule. I routed it through a series of anonymous servers, a ghost ship sailing on an encrypted tide, destined for the journalist whose face I remembered from a hushed, furtive meeting weeks ago. A pre-scheduled release, timed to coincide with the orchestrated chaos I was about to unleash. Once activated, it would be unstoppable, a wave breaking on the shores of public awareness. Then came the message for the detective. Not an email, not a text. A coded sequence of numbers delivered through a one-time burner phone to a specific, obscure public forum they monitored. It contained only coordinates and a time, a silent summons to a place where the air would taste of fuel and desperation. The coordinates pointed to the mandatory location. I paused, my breath catching in my throat. Had I missed something? A single digit misplaced, a timing error, a vulnerability in my own intricate web. The weight of it all pressed down, a crushing burden. I was a forensic accountant, not a spy, not a warrior. My weapons were spreadsheets, my battlefield a balance sheet. What right did I have to gamble so recklessly? What if I was wrong? What if this elaborate trap I was setting was merely a more complex snare for myself? The image of my family, bright and unaware, flashed behind my eyes, a silent plea. No, the die was cast, the data stream initiated. The true evidence was on its way, a slow-burning fuse. I wiped the console clean, leaving no trace, a phantom in a forgotten room. My heart hammered, a frantic drum against my ribs, but my mind was clear, focused. The next step was the riskiest, the most exposed. I had sent the summons, and now I had to answer it myself. Each mile closer to the coordinates felt like a tightening noose. The landscape flattened, trees giving way to low scrub, and then, finally, a vast expanse of asphalt. I killed my lights a mile out, coasting the rest of the way, the engine a low growl in the pre-dawn quiet. And then I saw it. The private airstrip, no lights, engine running. A single-engine plane, its propeller a blur, exhaust fumes pluming faintly in the cold air. It wasn't waiting for me, it was waiting for them. My trap was set, but I was standing right in the center of it. My breath plumed in the frigid air, a fragile ghost against the vast, star-dusted canvas above. The scent of junipers, a lingering phantom from my recent hiding, still clung to my jacket, a secret whispered against the wind. It was a cold comfort now, as I stood at the precipice of my desperate gamble. It was an anomaly, a mechanical beast stirring in a world otherwise asleep, its single, distant red navigation light a malevolent eye blinking in the gloom. I felt the vibrations through the soles of my shoes, a premonition more than a physical sensation. This wasn't a place for quiet reflection, but for sharp, decisive action. The engine's roar intensified slightly, a hungry growl. They were here, or they would be, moments from their escape, their final act of disappearing into the anonymous sky. Had I truly seen every angle, accounted for every contingency? The thought was fleeting, dismissed by the image of the ruined lives, the stolen futures, the sheer audacity of their avarice. No, there was no turning back. This vulnerability, the chink I had so painstakingly discovered in their armor, was this very moment, this remote patch of tarmac, this roaring engine poised for flight. A sleek, obsidian vehicle, silent save for the crunch of its tires on the gravel, pulled up near the idling jet. The syndicate leader, unmistakable even in the low light, stepped out, followed by a hulking enforcer and a nervous-looking aide clutching a slim briefcase. My grip tightened on the small, unassuming device in my pocket. It held their undoing, a digital truth that would shatter their empire. The syndicate leader's head snapped up, a predatory instinct honed by years of illicit maneuvering. His eyes, even from this distance, felt like chips of ice. "Thomas," his voice, surprisingly calm, carried across the tarmac a silken thread of menace, a most unexpected and ill-advised appearance. The enforcer took a step forward, a massive, unmoving wall of muscle. My gaze, however, remained fixed on the leader. "I imagine it is," I replied, my voice steadier than I felt, "especially when you're about to make a swift exit." He offered a thin, humorless smile. "One must always be prepared for unforeseen travel. But I confess, I did not anticipate you would be the one to see me off." His eyes flickered to my hand, where the device now lay openly, its small indicator light a faint, steady pulse. "What is it you hope to achieve, Accountant? A heroic last stand? You are alone." "Not entirely," I countered, my thumb hovering over the activation button. "This little contraption is broadcasting a rather detailed summary of your operations. Every ledger entry, every shell corporation, every laundered penny, every threatened life. It's all streaming right now to a very interested audience." I watched his face for the flicker, the crack in his composure. The authorities, the regulatory bodies, even a few choice journalists, they're all receiving a live feed. And the full data package, that's on a timer. If I don't confirm my safety in the next 10 minutes, it releases to the world, unencrypted, irreversible. The lie was audacious, a desperate gamble on their fear of exposure. The device was indeed broadcasting, but to a single, secure channel I had painstakingly established with a trusted contact. The timer was a fabrication, but the threat of public humiliation and legal dismantling was very real. The syndicate leader's face contorted, the mask of composure finally slipping. "I fool. Do I understand what I've done?" "I understand precisely," I said, my voice gaining strength, "that I underestimated the power of numbers and the stubbornness of a man who refuses to see his world dismantled by thieves." The enforcer lunged, a swift, brutal motion. My training, a frantic, clandestine series of lessons, kicked in. I sidestepped, not gracefully, but effectively, the rush of air from his swing grazing my ear. My eyes never left the syndicate leader. "Think carefully," I warned, my breath ragged. "Every second I delay, every violent act, only confirms the veracity of my claims. The clock is ticking." He hesitated, a crucial, agonizing beat. The engine's roar seemed to amplify, a frantic heartbeat against the backdrop of our standoff. The aide, pale and trembling, fumbled with his briefcase, his gaze darting between his leader and me. The syndicate leader's eyes narrowed, weighing the immediate threat of my revelation against the violence he undoubtedly wished to unleash. He knew. He could see the truth in my defiance, the unshakable conviction that I had truly set the gears in motion. Then a new sound cut through the night, the distant wail of sirens, faint at first, then growing with terrifying speed. Not a single siren, but many, converging from different directions. My heart leaped, a wild, joyous beat. My contact had delivered. The authorities were here. The syndicate leader's face turned ashen. He glanced at the jet, then at the rapidly approaching lights, despair and fury warring in his expression. The enforcer paused, his stance still aggressive, but his eyes now flickered with uncertainty. The aide dropped his briefcase, its contents spilling across the tarmac stacks of banded currency, glinting under the distant lights. "This is it," I whispered, not to them, but to myself, the cold wind whipping my words away. The game was over. The private airstrip, no lights, engine running, once their gateway to freedom, was now their trap. The engine continued its futile roar, a mournful lament for a flight that would never take wing. The scream of the jet engine was a physical force, vibrating through the soles of my shoes, through the very marrow of my bones. It was a predator's growl, ready to snatch away its prey. My breath hitched, a ragged thing in my throat. The syndicate leader, a silhouette against the faint glint of the fuselage, held my gaze, an unblinking challenge. His aide, a trembling shadow, fumbled with the briefcase, his eyes darting like trapped birds. The immediate future, a razor's edge, hovered between us. Then a sudden, blinding flash from the perimeter. Not a single light, but a multitude, erupting from the darkness that had cloaked the private airstrip. Red and blue strobes painted the tarmac in a frantic, pulsating rhythm. A flicker of something akin to surprise, then a raw, animalistic fury twisted his features. His hand, which had been inching toward his waist, froze. The aide whimpered, dropping the briefcase with a dull thud. "Don't move." The commands, amplified by bullhorns, cut through the night. I stood there, a statue carved from exhaustion and disbelief. My own hands, I realized, were still clenched, though against what enemy now I wasn't sure. The syndicate leader, for all his power and ruthlessness, was suddenly just a man surrounded, his escape route sealed by the very night he had sought to exploit. He let out a guttural curse, a sound of pure, unadulterated defeat, before the officers swarmed him. I watched as he was wrestled to the ground, his struggles futile against the coordinated force. The aide, already on his knees, offered no resistance. The engine of the private jet, once a symbol of imminent flight and danger, now idled, a subdued hum, its purpose thwarted. The sudden quiet, as the sirens died down to a low thrum and the immediate arrests were secured, was almost more deafening than the previous clamor. A hand landed on my shoulder, firm but not aggressive. I flinched, turning to see the detective, his face grim but etched with a flicker of something that might have been relief. "Thomas," he answered, his voice a low rumble. "It's over." Was it? My limbs felt heavy, weighted with the residue of fear and the adrenaline that had been my constant companion for weeks. They led me away from the captured figures, past the jet, towards a waiting vehicle. Hours later, the sterile hum of a secure facility replaced the engine's roar. I sat across from the detective in a sparse room, a lukewarm mug of coffee in my trembling hands. He laid out the pieces, a meticulous assembly of the puzzle I had only seen fragments of. "Your intel was precise, Thomas," the detective began, his gaze steady. "Every detail, every number. It allowed us to move in not just here but simultaneously on multiple fronts." He paused, taking a sip from his own mug. "The firm, it's a shambles." My stomach clenched. "The managing partner?" I asked, the name a bitter taste. "In custody, along with several other senior colleagues. The raid started just after we moved on the airstrip. Bank accounts frozen, records seized. The scale of the money laundering operation. It's staggering. Larger. That meant deeper, more insidious, more tentacles reaching into legitimate fronts. Your meticulous work on those shell corporations was invaluable. We're finding connections to legitimate businesses across 3 continents. The syndicate wasn't just moving dirty money. They were actively investing, buying influence, corrupting entire sectors. I remembered the slight hesitation of a colleague when I'd asked about a particular discrepancy in a ledger, the way another had quickly changed the subject when I'd probed a certain client's offshore holdings. At the time, I dismissed it as awkwardness, professional reticence. Now it was clear. They were either complicit or terrified or both. That thought, a quiet poison, seeped into my mind. I had worked alongside these people, shared coffee, discussed market trends. How many of them had known? How many had simply looked away? "Your name, Thomas, is completely cleared," the detective continued, pulling me from the murky depths of my thoughts. "In fact, you'll be hailed as a hero, a whistleblower who risked everything. The firm's internal obstruction. We have evidence of it. Threats made against you, attempts to discredit your findings. It's all part of the indictment." Hero. The word felt alien, ill-fitting. Cleared, yes, but what was left of the path I had meticulously built? My career, my professional identity, had been intertwined with that firm. Under protection since I made contact. We've ensured their security is absolute. I'll be able to see them soon. Relief. A warm, unexpected current washed over me, almost bringing tears to my eyes. That was the true victory, the only one that truly mattered. The detective leaned forward, his expression softening slightly. This wasn't just about money, Thomas. It was about power, influence, and a complete disregard for the law. I brought it all crashing down. He spoke of closure, of justice. But for me, the aftermath was just beginning. The syndicate leader was behind bars, his network unraveling, but the scars of this ordeal were etched deep. The world I knew, the world of clean balance sheets and orderly ledgers, had been irrevocably stained. I had survived, I was free, but the cost, the true accounting of that, I realized, was yet to be made. The quiet hum of the secure facility was a stark contrast to the roar of the jet, yet both held a similar weight, the end of one chapter and the terrifying, uncertain beginning of another. My mind, usually so precise, felt like a scattered deck of cards. The firm, a pillar of my professional life, was now a monument to corruption, and I, its reluctant demolisher. What would I build now from the rubble of my past? The question hung in the air, heavy and unanswered. I had surrendered the illusion of safety. The quiet hum of the engine, a distant beast stirring in the night, was the only sound that pierced the thick silence surrounding us. My daughter, a small, warm weight against my side, breathed in the rhythm of innocent sleep. My wife's hand, cool and steady, found mine, a silent anchor in the swirling chaos of my thoughts. The syndicate leader was behind bars, his network unraveling like a cheap sweater. Yet the relief was not the clean, crisp sensation I had once imagined. It was a mudded thing, stained with the indelible ink of betrayal and peril. We were not home, not truly. The house where memories bloomed and faded, where dust motes danced in sunbeams, felt like a distant shore. We had been moved from safe house to safer house, each temporary haven a stark reminder of the fragile peace we chased. This was the final step, they said, the true beginning of the end. Yet, air still crackled with an unseen electricity, a residual current from the storm we had weathered. My gaze drifted to the window, the glass a dark mirror reflecting only my own haunted eyes. I saw the faint, spectral outline of my old self, the meticulous accountant, confident in the predictable arc of numbers. That man was gone, shattered by the weight of corporate deceit and the stark, brutal reality of human avarice. A subtle shift in the vehicle's motion, a gentle swerve, indicated our arrival. The gravel crunched under the tires, a sound like dry bones breaking. My breath hitched. This was it. I nodded, the movement stiff, as I'll ever be. A figure emerged from the shadow of the jet's wing, a silhouette growing taller, more defined as it approached. It was the handler, a man whose face I still struggled to place definitively, a chameleon of the clandestine world. He opened the vehicle door, the interior light momentarily spilling outwards, briefly illuminating the stark, windswept landscape. The wind carried the metallic tang of jet fuel and the raw scent of damp earth. "Thomas," he said, his voice a low rumble devoid of inflection. "Everything is prepared." I unbuckled my daughter, lifting her gently into my arms. She stirred, a soft sigh escaping her lips, then nestled deeper, trusting in my embrace. My wife stepped out, her hands still linked with mine. It was a tableau of quiet defiance, a family unit unbroken, despite the world's best efforts. As we walked towards the aircraft, the drone of the engine growing louder, a sudden, sharp thought pricked at my mind. The handler had mentioned the syndicate's financial structure, how it mirrored legitimate corporations, how the internal obfuscation was almost impenetrable. Yet, there had been that one small discrepancy. A single, recurring payment routed through an obscure shell company, an amount so trivial it almost seemed accidental. I had dismissed it then, focused on the larger, more obvious flows. But now, in the stillness of the night, a flicker of doubt ignited. Why bother with such a minuscule, convoluted transfer if not to establish a trail, a fallback, a contingency for a future, even more complex operation? It didn't quite add up to their usual brutal efficiency. A seed of unease, tiny but persistent, planted itself deep. "Your new identities," the handler said, handing me a slim, unmarked envelope once we were inside the quiet cabin. The interior was Spartan, functional. New lives, new opportunities. The firm you spoke of, the one dedicated to ethical financial oversight, they're expecting you. They've been briefed on your unique skill set. My eyes met his. And my old life, he paused, a flicker of something unreadable in his gaze. Erased for your protection, a necessary sacrifice. A sacrifice. Yes, that's what it was. The gilded cage of my former career, the prestige, the predictable climb, all gone. But what had replaced it was something far more precious, freedom and a clarity of purpose forged in the crucible of fear. I looked at my wife, her eyes reflecting the cabin's muted light. She knew. He had always known. We had discussed it in hushed tones late into the night, mapping out a future that wasn't about climbing corporate ladders, but about building something real, something clean. It's not just about running, I said, my voice resonating in the confined space. It's about building something that stands against what we fought. The handler simply nodded, a silent acknowledgement. He understood the unspoken plea, the need for more than just survival. There was no going back. The past was a landscape ravaged by fire, but from its ashes, something new could emerge. My daughter stirred again, her small hand reaching for my face, her touch soft as a butterfly's wing. I held her closer, my gaze lingering on her peaceful face, then on my wife's steady profile. We were scarred, yes, but not broken. We were stronger, bound by shared ordeal, our connections forged in fire. But now it was tempered by a resolute determination, a cautious hope that flickered like a distant lighthouse beacon. The jet lifted, a sudden surge, pushing us back into our seats. Below, the ground lights vanished, swallowed by the vast, indifferent night. We were ascending, leaving the old world behind, heading towards a new horizon, uncertain yet filled with the quiet promise of a life rebuilt, brick by painstaking brick, in the steadfast pursuit of a brighter, more honest dawn. The fight was far from over, I knew, but now I was ready. We were ready.